those of you that didn't see, I am Kimberly Payne. I am the Editorial Coordinator for Sew News magazine, and in my previous life, before starting at Sew News, I'm actually a sewing pattern designer. So I've been making sewing patterns for, oh gosh, 8 years, I think. And so it's fun to now be working with the magazine, and I'm getting to work with just like the most creative group of people. So it's just a really fun place to be. And it's fun to hear from other people in the sewing community and the things that are interesting to them, the fabrics that they like to sew, the things they would like to learn. And so that's a lot of what we are focusing on, at least in the coming issues, is really, talking about the things that ourselves as sewists or other people that we know within the sewing world, what they are interested in learning more about. And I think that a common thing that I have come across in all of the years of sewing and teaching and pattern design is the level of comfort with knits. And so that's kind of where I love teaching the most, is showing that sewing with stretchy fabric does not have to be scary. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It is, in fact, really fun, and I will say easy. As soon as you get over the fact that it feels really scary, it's actually very easy to sew, and you don't need anything fancy. A regular sewing machine is all you need. So before I get started, though, a big part of my love of teaching, and part of the reason why I'm here today to share with you guys is we are going to be having our first Stitch Fest, and that is in Loveland, Colorado, and it is coming up in like a week and a half. So if you are in the Denver area, you should definitely check it out. The dates are April 12th through the 15th. Again, it's in Loveland, Colorado, at the Embassy Suites there in Loveland. You can find all the details on the sewdaily.com/StitchFest. And what's so great about this event is that it's going to be both sewing garments, we have knitting, and then there's a whole other element of the event, which is interweave, so knitting and crochet. There's literally no shortage of things that you can do. So you could fill your days with all kinds of things. So for the, again, April 12th through the 15th, there are still classes available that you could sign up for. And I am actually teaching at least 4 classes, and most of them are about knits. And so I was really wanting to come on here and help people see that sewing with knits is not nearly as scary and overwhelming as most people think. And so in terms of the event, we'll be doing that in April in Loveland. If you can't make Loveland, we are holding another event in Milwaukee, May 24th through the 27th. I'm teaching the same classes in Milwaukee as I am in Loveland. So if you are unable to make the dates in April but want to come see us in Milwaukee, you can learn even more about sewing with knits with me. And then, as I mentioned before, it's also going to be in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, and that will be in August. That registration isn't available yet, but you can register for Milwaukee or Loveland. And one of the main classes, like I said, that I'm teaching is sewing with knits. And I think the biggest question I've had over the years is, how do you sew with a regular machine? And so that's the biggest thing that I wanted to show you, because you don't need a fancy machine. You really can just use a zigzag stitch, and that's it. It's a zigzag stitch on a regular machine. and you get great finished garments. Over the years, I have taught people who have never sewn how to sew on a regular machine. So I did want to go over a couple of things before I do a little bit of sewing on the machine. Again, I am sewing on my Janome. It is the Sewist 721. This is actually the machine that I use for students. When I was teaching some younger kids to sew, I got a whole set of these so that we could have like the least automated settings, which when you're learning to sew, sometimes it's nice to have something that's pretty basic, but like such a solid machine. I'm actually really excited. I think I mentioned that Janome is the machine sponsor for our events, for our Stitch Fest events. And so I'm going to get to check out all of the fancy sewing machines. Years ago, I sewed on a very basic machine for probably, I don't know, 15 years on a very basic Brother sewing machine that I got, I think, for my 16th birthday. And so I sewed on that for probably 15 years, and then I got to upgrade, and I upgraded to a Janome New Home, where is it? Master, or Memory Craft. And it was very exciting. So I'm just excited at Stitch Fest to be able to play around with all of the machines there, and who knows, maybe look at some upgrades because my machine is getting a little older, and there's going to be sergers, and that's another thing that's on my list. So I'm excited to just play around with the machines while we're there. So in terms of sewing machines, like I said, you just need a regular sewing machine. And then really the most important, or the best way to get a good end product is making sure that you have knit needles. Jersey, ballpoint, there's quite a few different types of knit needles. I typically just focus on any of, it really can be any knit needle, like ballpoint, stretch, or jersey. The main thing to know about the jersey needles compared to, say, a universal needle is that with a universal needle, or when you're sewing with woven fabric, the needle will come down and it actually pierces the fabric, so the warp and weft, so the different directions of the fabric. Universal needle like breaks through those fibers. With a ballpoint or jersey or stretch needle, what it's essentially doing is it's coming down into the fabric and it's pushing it apart. So it's kind of going between the different, the warp and weft. And so the main reason that that's important is that you don't get the same wavy stitches. So it's kind of just pushing the fabric out of the way and going right down through. So I will say, though, I have forgotten to change my needle before. It does work with a universal, but it definitely is not quite as smooth as a regular knit or stretch needle. Now, I just bought like this giant, years ago, this giant pack of Schmetz ballpoint needles. So I don't actually always change based on the type of knit that I'm working with. But if you are particular like that, there are definitely different types of knit needles. As long as I have a ballpoint, good enough for me. I'm a pretty loosey-goosey sewist, and so as long as I am usually using the right kind of needle, that works for me. Now, I have a question, it looks like, about Gutermann's stretch thread. So I have actually never used anything other than just regular polyester thread. I know in a serger you can try woolly nylon for, I believe, the loopers, but I don't use anything special. I use the Gutermann all-purpose polyester thread. So if anybody has any other thoughts on stretch thread, oh, Maraflex. Yeah, I've never used it, so I'd love to hear if any of you have used it and you really like it. I haven't. I just use regular old Gutermann's thread. So if there was any other questions about that, let me know. But again, I haven't ever used anything fancy. I just kind of use what's in my machine already. So with sewing knits, I am going to, let's see, maybe I'll switch my camera so you guys can look at some of the sample. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I did a couple of test stitches because I really wanted to show you guys. Let's see, find the best place for it. So typically, when you say you click over to your machine, and if it's sort of a automated machine, it's going to set a standard zigzag. So that would be this. This is a zigzag 5 wide. So if you can see that, you can see that the one on the bigger one right here, sorry, your left, my right, the one on the right is a 5 wide. Now you can totally use that. That works just great. But I find that I like to use slightly narrow zigzag when I sew knits. And the main reason for that is that I like it to behave like a straight stitch, but have the stretch of a zigzag. So again, this is a 5 wide zigzag with a length of 3.5, roughly 3.5. So this one, I decided, so 5, this is a width of 3 with a length of 3.5. And then this one really is my preferred zigzag. And this is a 1, it's a width of 1 and a length of 3.5. So you can see that this really does look like a straight stitch compared to these other two. So if you're worried about stretch, let me pull this here, these stretch just as well. So this one stretches, we don't have to worry about the stitches breaking. This one stretches pretty well. And believe it or not, the little one stretches as well. Now I will say, if you are needing to sew something and have it be incredibly stretchy, you're probably not going to want to go with this. But this is how I've always sewn t-shirts, tank tops, but possibly if you're sewing something like a athletic pants, you know, some sort of legging, you might need to just go ahead and go with one that's just slightly stretchier. But they all work. And from the right side, which I can't do because I didn't necessarily sew two together, but I can, you will see that this is somewhat noticeable on the front of the garment, and this one really does look like a straight stitch. So let me bring you guys back. Okay. So there was a question. Let me just pull that back up. So Cheryl asked if you're doing like a t-shirt knit, fleece, sweatshirt material, if you should use the same needle. I'm sure there's a very proper way to answer this question, which I tend to do things the way that works best for me, not necessarily the way that if there were rules for sewing, the way that those people would tell you. But basically, if it has stretch, use a knit jersey stretch needle. If it doesn't have stretch, you can use just a regular universal needle. Thank you, Sadie. There are no rules. If it works, it works. And that's kind of my method of sewing in general, is that there might be rules, but I'm just going to do what works for me, and I really encourage you to do the same. If you're watching this and thinking, well, I don't do it that way, then you do your way. But in general, these things have been quite successful for me, for my students over the years, and yeah, it really is whatever works best for you. Yes, Suze, experiment on scraps. I can't tell, well, I spent time before class started practicing on a couple of different types of knits because there is so many different types of knits. So this one is, what is it, cotton lycra. So this is a 95 cotton, 5 lycra, and it has a very different stretch than this one, which is more of a lightweight active wear. And then I've got some, you know, of my favorite like bamboo knit. This is a, oh my gosh, I will post in the comments some of my favorite knit fabrics as well and where I get them. But each of these is slightly different. So you really kind of take that into consideration when you are finding a needle that's going to work for you. So kind of just practice. If you're noticing it's not working like you want, then there could be another needle that's going to work better. Let me see. It looks like we've got a couple of questions. Let me find you. Okay. Yes, Patricia, the weight of the knit is going to determine the size of the stretch needle. So you're going to want to look into that. I just use what's already in my machine. So you can definitely consider all the variables when choosing a needle size, or just sew and hope for the best, which is kind of how all of my sewing goes, is I sew and hope for the best. Let me see if there's any other questions that some people had. Let me see. Okay, so it looks like, Julie, is your question about an embroidery machine? I don't have enough answers for that in terms of, I don't know if you're wondering about sewing a knit with an embroidery machine. So I don't think I'll be able to help you with that. And yes, Sadie, what works with one fabric could be totally different for another. I have some bamboo rib, and I do find when I'm working with a knit that doesn't have as much recovery, so the recovery is kind of, you know, if you were to use this for a neckband, it doesn't spring back. Let me show you this. So this springs right back where it was before. This is kind of, just kind of is. It doesn't spring back as much. So I do find that sometimes things don't work as well with the different fabrics. A couple of other things that I did want to mention is, I know it kind of, people go one way or the other in terms of cutting knits. I highly recommend using pattern weights, and a rotary cutter. And the reason for that is the more you work or manipulate a knit, you don't want it to really stretch out. So if you are, laying down your fabric and you're using scissors, a lot of times that kind of brings up the edges. And so you are going to get a bit of difference. What I really like is a nice sharp rotary blade and pattern weights, and then it just cuts through perfectly, and you don't get a lot of that adjustment with the knit. But as with everything, do what works best for you. And then pins. Just sewing with knit is really no different than sewing with a woven. You're going to want to avoid stretching the fabric while it's going through the machine. So it's essentially what I always have told my daughter as she has learned to sew and other students is, your hands are guiding the fabric through, but let the machine do kind of the movement in terms of try not to stretch the fabric while you're putting it through the machine. So I can, what I'm going to do really quickly is show you as I go through the machine. I'm just going to cut a couple of quick pieces of knit here. We'll use scraps because we all have scraps laying around. Also, if you're ever looking for a really good knit scrap project, I highly recommend finding an underwear pattern, because not only is it amazing because your underwear will fit your body perfectly or close enough, but it's a great use for all of these pieces of knit. As you sew with knit, you end up just collecting all of these, what am I going to do with little pieces of knit? But this would make a great gusset for underwear, or color blocked panels. So we actually we're going to be having a free underwear pattern in our upcoming summer issue. So that is a great way as well to check out sewing underwear. So I'm just going to I changed my mind. I'm going to sew these two together because my thread is dark, and so I want you guys to be able to see it. So let me just bring my laptop here so you guys can see. Perfect. Okay, so as I said, you don't have to do anything special. I am going to do my favorite stitch, which is the width of about a 1 or 0.5, depending on the machine. And then we'll do a bigger seam allowance. And then, as I'm sewing, I could be really good and use pins, but I don't have pins with me. So do as I say, not as I do. Make sure you do some pins. And then you're just like sewing any of your other projects. I'm not stretching, I'm not pulling. I am simply guiding it. And then I want to show you guys what this looks like. I'll use these scissors. What this looks like from the right side. So pretending like this is actually a garment, you can see that from the right side, it is behaving like a straight stitch. So from this direction, but if I'm stretching, it's still, sorry, we've got lots of fabric here. It is still stretching, like the seam still stretches, okay? So that really just shows that you can, I mean, these are slightly slippery fabrics and they sew wonderful with just a regular sewing machine. And so it's honestly, it's almost like you have to turn off your brain and just let your brain think that you are sewing with, oh, I'm not in the picture. Let's try this again. Just basically let your brain think that you are sewing with a woven fabric, because really, for the most part, there is nothing different. And I will say, if at the end you end up with some wavy seams, a little steam from your iron does amazing work. A lot of times, it's not that the fabric is stretched out, it's just that it's kind of been manipulated a bit while you were sewing, and so just give it a good steam or a wash and dry, and any like wavy parts will go away. So I did want to answer a question in the chat. Somebody asked if you should pre-wash your knits. So, regardless of the type of fabric, if you are sewing garments, you should always pre-wash your fabric. And the reason for that is that with so many garments, you are not necessarily form-fitting, but even if the fabric shrinks a little bit, that could be the difference between a well-fitting top or pants or whatever garment you're making. That could be enough of a difference that it no longer fits. And I'm saying this from experience. Years ago, I sewed a tank top, and I was so excited about it, but I had forgotten to pre-wash, and I thought, well, it's really not that big of a deal, until I put this tank top on after washing it, and it was so tight. It cut into my armpits, and I was not a fan. So I will always say, take the time to wash it. What I typically do, which you guys can see behind me, is my like wall of fabric. And basically, anytime I get new fabric, I immediately wash it, fold it, and get it on to my shelf, so that I know anything that's here in my sewing room can be used immediately. I don't have to wait. Another question, it looks like, is Suze is asking about a walking foot. So, I will say that walking feet are amazing. And I think for some knits, it's super helpful. But I don't use a walking foot only because I tend to sew so fast that I feel like the walking foot slows me down. And so, again, everybody can kind of do what they want. And if you're more comfortable using a walking foot, definitely do that. But it's not, you don't have to use a walking foot with knits. A lot of times, the best place that a walking foot helps is right when you get started. If you're not careful, if you've got like this knit in particular, you have to be careful when you get started, because your machine will eat your fabric, so it'll shove it down in the throat plate if it's too close to the edge. So a walking foot, I think, would be really helpful with that, but it's by no means is it necessary. And like I said, I just want to race through. My machine has the variable speed, so I crank that up and just like blow through my projects. So for me, I don't use a walking foot, but I know a lot of people have had great success with a walking foot. So I would love to hear if there are any other questions. I know this was like a really quick chat about sewing with knits, and honestly, if we saw each other in real life, I would probably talk your ear off about sewing, and specifically sewing with knits, because I love talking about it. And mostly I love making it so that people aren't scared of sewing with knits. So I think that's why my favorite classes to teach are sewing with knits. And so if you have any other questions, let me know. Yes, Suze, a piece of tissue paper is like the perfect place to start if your machine wants to eat your fabric. Anybody who's a knitter, I'm sure there's like an actual term for this, but basically for knitting sometimes no, quilting, not knitting. Whew. Quilting, you have like a little square of fabric that you start sewing before you then put your actual quilting fabric through. And I do that as well. But tissue paper is great because then you can just rip it off at the end, and it really does keep your fabric from being shoved down into the throat plate. Yeah, were there any other questions? I would love to connect with more of you. I will post some of my favorite like resources, favorite fabric. I'll put some links to Stitch Fest. So if this was interesting to you, you want to feel a little more comfortable sewing knits, then definitely check out the Stitch Fest that we have going on, because it's like 6-hour classes of me teaching you how to sew a t-shirt, a cardigan. You could learn to draft your own t-shirt sloper. I'm also sewing teaching some woven. There is like no shortage of fun and amazing classes to take. One of the people on our team is teaching sewing a leather bag, which if you're scared of sewing knit and it's not as hard as you think, leather I think is the same way. I wish I wasn't teaching at the same time, because then I could take that class as well. Just as a bit of reference, if you're signing up for like a 3 to 4 hour class, it's $105, which is such a deal because you learn so much in these classes. And my classes, which are 6 hours, are $185. But there is still early bird pricing for the Milwaukee event, and so you can get in a slightly lower price. There's so much other stuff going on at these events as well. So I will put some links below, and you also then get to take your classes on Janome machines, which feels like such a luxury for all of you that I'm sure have Janomes. They're such good machines, and they're really easy and fun to sew with. So if there are no other questions, I will let you all get back to your day. And I really, really appreciate you guys coming and joining me and sharing where you're from. And I hope this has been a bit of a glimpse into how knit fabric is not nearly as scary to sew with as I think a lot of us think it is. So thank you guys so much for having me, and I hope to be able to do this again another time. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming, you guys.